We do have good news from last week. We had a good forecast. The bad news is that council member proposals far exceed that good forecast. We cannot fund every proposal to 100%, and this includes me and my proposals today.
Well, that's the Seattle City Council this week, and the amendments are trickling in. As expected, not a lot of room to move on this budget, and the historic differences between this year and years past when it comes to the actual number of amendments is actually pretty stark. We're going to check that out. And while the council is working on that, the mayor is reckoning with some new polling numbers that show he is still in a big fight if he's going to get reelected. Plus, there is a push for more reliable bus routes in the city of Seattle. But who's listening? And how's that going to happen in a very congested Emerald City? All this and more in focus this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine, and I am joined by my friend and co-host, David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I got to ask this. Are you watching the World Series and thinking, man, the Mariners could have taken these Dodger fools? What's on your mind with that?
I am, sadly, and I was sort of hoping actually that the Dodgers would look unbeatable because that would give me a little peace of mind that even if the Mariners got in, they would have gotten crushed. But I don't know. I think although the Dodgers are still holding the Blue Jays to under wraps for the most part for the last couple of games, and the Blue Jays lineup is better than the Mariners, so it would have been tough for the M's, but I think there's a path there if they had made it to the World Series.
I know. I could see him competing with him for sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you, David. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Check them out. They display our sign proudly on that stand down there. Thanks also to patrons of the show. Eric, always appreciate your interaction with the program. Thanks for chiming in as you do. If you want to interact with the show a little bit more, maybe even get the first listen on Patrons First podcast, well, please subscribe on Patreon. I'll actually send you your very own podcast decal, too. So find the program on Patreon, Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Also, thanks for watching this podcast on Converge Media, the video version on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get this thing going. Time for Right Here, Right Now. We're going to get to the budget in just a second, but David, I wanted to touch on these polling numbers for the mayor's race. You wrote about this for the Seattle Times recently. The numbers came out late last week. The Northwest Progressive Institute ran a poll that showed Katie Wilson with a 45 to 40% lead over Bruce Harrell. The Stranger newspaper, for the first time, also ran a poll. It showed a 12-point lead for Wilson, 46 to 34%. And I know there's some caveats to both of these figures. NPI's poll showed 11% undecided. The Stranger poll showed just a 4-point lead for Wilson when narrowed down to likely voters. But give me that big picture. What do you get out of these numbers with Election Day less than a week away?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're obviously closer than what the primary results showed. So on their surface, that's good news for Harrell that he, at least according to these polls, has perhaps narrowed the gap. It's hard to say exactly. Though if you look under the hood, I would say that there are probably more concerning signs for Harrell than there are for Wilson. Namely that Harrell's approval rating, both his job performance and favorability. So one, how is he doing in the job? The other, what do you think of him as a person? Both of them have turned negative and have gotten worse than the last time NPI released a poll, I think back in July. So that is not a great sign if you think that he has a chance at kind of making up the ground that he'd lost in August. You wouldn't want to see those numbers going the other way, that people are starting to feel better about him. Meanwhile, Katie Wilson's favorability, it's not over 50%, but she has more better favorabilities than unfavorabilities. So
it's on the rise, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, the Harrell strategy has been to paint Katie Wilson in an unflattering light, inexperienced, somebody who's previously spoken about defunding the police. And so you would think that if his message was landing, his numbers, favorability numbers would look better and hers would look worse. I would say that the point of optimism for Harrell is that in the first round of questioning from the NPI poll, there was, I think it was a 7 or 8 point gap that Wilson was leading over Harrell with, I think, something like 20% undecided. And then when they pushed those undecided people to make up their mind, more of them went to Harrell. A good deal more of them went to Harrell than went to Wilson, which, if you're looking at the numbers, somebody, there's going to be some divvying up of the undecided voters between the two. And so for Harrell, you have to feel pretty good that the people who say they're undecided but then are forced to make a choice broke more heavily for him.
Hmm.
So I would say on a whole, this is not a very good poll for Mayor Harrell, and certainly a better one for Katie Wilson. Though, that those undecided splits make me think that this is certainly not a closed race.
Not at all. Not at all. You made a point also in your piece that I thought was very interesting. We just don't often get a lot of polling in hyper local races like this, but now we have the stranger jumping in with its first poll. The Northwest Progressive Institute has actually been doing this for a while. Do you see other groups trying to jump in on doing some polling in the future? I know the Seattle Metro Chamber does a regular poll on concerns of Seattle residents when it comes to public safety, homelessness, etc. Would they ever jump into the game? Why are so few outlets doing work of this kind? I know it's kind of a meta issue, but I wanted to ask you about that.
Well, I think because it's expensive,
Yeah.
it's, easier to, if you're pulling one, I mean, realistically, you need 600 survey respondents or weighted in a certain way to have a decent poll. If you're looking at Washington State and trying to pull off Washington, not particularly hard to get 600 people that have some sort of fairly representative, cross section of Washington voters. But if you're looking at Seattle, you have to, there's just not as big of a pool to draw from to get those numbers. And then, you have this district-based system, so you're
Yeah.
really trying to get fairly even representation from each district. So I just think and so, these polls can be done, but it just means you're going to have to pay for more hours of calling to get the kind of responses you want. So I think it's just
Yeah.
that the number one issue is expensive. We know the campaigns and the PACs do their own polling, and we know that because we can look at the expense reports and see, they've paid such and such, $10,000 or whatever to EMC Research to do this polling.
Hmm.
Uh, those will occasionally be, quote, leaked out, though I think it's usually a sanctioned leak. In occasions where those campaigns or those PACs thinks getting the results out there might be beneficial to them. A lot of times, actually, it's when their candidate is maybe down by a couple points, so they want to
Hmm.
juice a little more fundraising out of their supporters, that sort of thing. But for the most part, we never actually see those polls, at least not on the record.
Yeah.
Uh, so, I think just at the end of the day, it really comes down to it costs a lot of money, and I know the Seattle Times has done some polling in the past. We're not
Yeah.
doing any this time around. So it's just sort of trying to balance, is it worth the expense to gauge something that we are going to have a fairly definitive response on in a week?
Right.
Um, for most entities, the answer is no, though
Yeah.
as a reporter, I'm always happy when someone decides to do yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see where those numbers are falling. So, again, we're going to have a lot more information coming up next week. I should point out the Seattle City Council has plenty on its plate this week. They are approving the plan to try to encourage more grocery stores to be built in the city, which we talked about on the podcast recently. But the big news, council members came out with their budget amendments this week. David, I need to check my math on this, but I was looking at the list of amendments the council is considering this year. I tallied up 35 of them, which is about a quarter of what I recall from years past. I know last year the council was looking at 120 plus amendments. I remember some years when the numbers were up around 200. And I know there's not a lot of room to move in this budget, as we have discussed, but this just seems like such a marked difference from years past when it comes to amendments. Any thoughts on that and what the council's doing this week?
Well, I think that actually maybe as of today, that number is up to more like 100.
Okay,
The
okay,
council released some more proposed amendments to SDOT and Office of Housing, for example, and
okay.
OPCD. I think what's happening here is they're just kind of rolling them out sort of slowly.
I
Um,
see.
I checked in with the council staff, and they said that at the end of the day, once all of these budget amendments are made public, they would add around $170 million to the budget. I think part of what's happening here is council member and budget chair Strauss is doing it in a different way. I think
Yeah,
usually what would happen is there'd be some kind of backroom discussions, and they would try and, they would all talk to the budget chair, and a few people would sign off, and then you'd kind of get this not quite finished product, but something closer to a finished
right,
product made
right.
public of like, here are our proposed amendments, and that would be pretty close to balance, which would mean it would include cuts to fund the amendments. He's
Yes.
not doing that this year. He is just collecting and essentially publishing all of the proposed amendments. I don't know if
Okay.
it's literally 100% of them. And then over the next week and a half, they're going to whittle them down. He's saying it's a better and more transparent process. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think it makes it a little messier because now um, people can see like,
Yeah.
oh, somebody's trying to give my organization money, and now they know whether or not that's ever going to actually make it into the final budget package.
Okay.
Um, but the reality is, like I said, there's $170 million apparently. I haven't seen all of them. I don't think they've all been published yet
Yeah.
in budget ads. And as we know, there's really only like 14 million in extra spending,
If that, right.
if that. And so for anywhere close to $170 million to make it in, which again, I don't think is going to happen,
Right.
you'd have to make some fairly significant changes to what Mayor Harrell's proposed and make
Yeah.
some pretty significant cuts. So I don't think that's going to happen. It is an interesting experiment in kind of radical transparency,
Yeah.
just put these proposals out there. I do think, again, if you're if you're an organization that sees that such and such council member wants to fund your thing, and then it doesn't make it into the final package, you're going to be able to kind of plead your case a little more. You might get a little more
Yeah.
frustrated with some council members. So, we'll see if it's a practice that continues next year.
Fair enough. And thank you for the breakdown there. I've been seeing a lot of these different amendments flying around, and I know more are coming in, but I was looking at some of those initial documents that were put
Yeah.
out for the meeting on Tuesday morning. So thank you for the update there. I did want to talk about some of these different amendments. There was one that I was really keying in on. Councilmember Strauss, the budget chair, he's calling for a $4.7 million add to the Revenue Stabilization Fund. I think it makes some sense to try to set some money aside during an unsettled time. And again, the council's maybe talking about $12, $14 million they might have extra to spend based on last week's economic forecast. But I just wonder how it actually shakes out here because you got these concerns over cuts from the federal government affecting Seattle maybe 6 months from now, maybe 12 months from now. If that happens, does the council reconvene in emergency mode to make changes to the budget? They try to take care of it in their supplemental budget next year. Do you have an idea of what that would look like?
No, I don't. I mean, I think it's a test of how much of an emergency you think right now is. I think putting 4.7 million in the Revenue Stabilization Fund suggests they think the city can get by without spending that money right now.
Right.
I think as far as what a lot of these council people were saying on the campaign trail, that would be a more fitting proposal, which is
Sure.
let's kind of shore up our systemic problems we have with the budget. I, though, look at some of these other amendments like, I saw Council President Nelson is proposing $10 million in rent assistance for city-funded Office of Housing projects. Are you really gonna, and I'm sure that's needed. I've reported a
Sure.
lot on how challenging it is right now for affordable housing providers. Do you look them in the face and say, it's more important for us to put money into our
Mm,
reserves than it is to give you this rental assistance? That strikes me as a difficult thing for them to do, no matter
yeah.
how theoretically motivated they are to put money away for future challenging times.
Hmm.
Particularly when, that again, there's an election next week. They won't have this all sorted out by then.
Yeah.
Um, but if you're sort of trying to signal to your supporters and voters who, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I think people are more interested in funding stuff than they are cutting stuff.
Always.
I just think it's going to be sort of a tough ask to take a look at the menu of priorities that have been put forward here and say that it was more important to save money for later.
Yeah, yeah, hear you loud and clear. That's going to be an interesting discussion. And I should let people know there is a public hearing coming up on the 6th of November, 5 o'clock at City Council chambers there at City Hall. So if you'd like to get your 2 cents in here or even more, give that a shot. That's when that next public hearing is. All right, coming up. Following up on a new contract for the city's largest union of police officers. What did the city get? What did officers get? What didn't they get? We're analyzing this new agreement coming up on Now Hear This. Well, big announcement last week. SPOG, the Seattle Police Officers Guild, which covers the bulk of Seattle's rank and file officers, they got a big raise, about 13% over last year. And another big change happened with CARE, the Community Assisted Response and Engagement Teams. This is non-police 911 alternative folks who help with person down calls and the like. They're going to be allowed to respond on their own in many cases, not a dual dispatch with police, as has been the case. CARE Chief Amy Barden broke down some of the details at a press conference and some of the frustrations she is hearing from Seattle residents about 911 responses.
When we are talking about human suffering, we need to do better and we need to demand better. That is how it has been done is unacceptable. The status quo is unacceptable. The historic pace and process of bureaucracy is unacceptable.
David, I know we've talked about this a lot, but I did want to summarize this. What did police get out of this contract? What did the city get? Because this deal to give a boost to care sounds good from a city perspective, but you also raised some points in your piece writing about this. Some of the accountability measures the city was looking for, they did not get those. Talk about this big deal. Talk about this deal, big picture, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, big picture is it, I would say the top line is it kind of accomplishes the priority of freeing care responders to an extent to respond on their own. And that is a big priority, because if the point of a police alternative is truly to substitute what police are doing, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for them to be required to dispatch alongside police, which has been the case up until now. So the contract does free them to an extent to respond to things on their own. And then in turn, the police get a bunch of money. Frankly, they were already the highest paid in the state. Now, if you're a new recruit, you can earn almost $120,000 in your first year.
Right.
That is, that's a good chunk of change.
Yep.
The nuance, though, makes it, I think, raises more questions about it. For one, the care response is not unfettered. There are still restrictions on exactly where they can go, mostly to public spaces.
Right.
And so that, I think, is one point of concern for people, which is if we are truly trying to create a free care department, this still puts some restrictions on what they can or can't do.
Yeah.
And then the other piece, like you said, and this has been the kind of concern of these contracts year in and year out, is what does it do for accountability? And the answer to this one is really not that much.
Right.
It makes some changes around the 180-day timeline that the Office of Police Accountability is bound to dole out discipline, and then create some new routes to set a low-level discipline within the chain of command. Those are fine. I think people are happy with those, but there are a few kind of really big thorny accountability questions that, according to Andrew Meyerberg, the chief of staff for Harrell, are now at an impasse. And I'd say the biggest one is this question of arbitration, which is really what dominates police discipline both here and across the country, which is that, a chief can say, you did wrong, I'm firing you. And then the officer has this opportunity to go to an outside arbitrator, appeal their case. Usually what happens is those arbitrators are tailoring the discipline based on precedent.
Yeah.
And so if somebody somewhere had been let off the hook for the exact same crime, or, well, not crime, but allegation, then that arbitrator is going to be a lot more likely to say, this doesn't match with what I've seen elsewhere, so therefore I'm overturning the chief's decision and reinstating you. We've seen that happen. Adley Shepard, the cop who punched the woman in the back of the car, was fired and then was reinstated by an arbitrator. And this, we know that this was the kind of number one concern of Judge Robart during the consent decree process, and he actually held up full compliance because this question had not been solved. He is no longer in the picture, and maybe we're kind of getting a glimpse into what the implications of him not being around are, because basically what the city and the union have done is kick this question down the road. So that is still a major one.
From what I heard from the mayor's office and just some of the dealings I've had with them and the city council, they didn't want to give up this piece on arbitration. The city didn't want to. I guess they're trying to stick to their guns there in terms of what the city wants, but clearly SPOG isn't playing with that, it sounds like.
Yeah, and probably what happens is this goes to a mediator or an effects arbitrator. So it's kind of a different arbitrator, which is when you're in contract negotiations and you come to a standstill, you go to a outside person who's, I mean, first you try a mediator who tries to get the two sides to come to an agreement.
Right.
If that doesn't work, you go to an impasse, and then in an impasse, you go to an arbitrator, which is somebody who's going to say, here's the conclusion, here's what I decide. And that's a real crapshoot, because these people are spread across the country. You might get someone from a, conservative part of the country who's much more going to favor the police union, whatever it might be. So then you kind of might be rolling the dice on someone just saying, you know what, the police are right, you can't touch this, and then you're out of luck. I would say at the end, it's true that they haven't given up on arbitration or these other accountability pieces, but by going to an impasse, it introduces a whole lot more uncertainty into whether or not you actually can get the thing that you want to get rather than coming up with a solution at the bargaining table.
Yeah, that's fair. Back on care real quick. I thought it was interesting hearing Chief Barden talk about this. It's a little too early to tell about how care is going to impact other 911 calls that police go to, but that was definitely part of this because care deals with all the 911 calls coming into the city. It's its own separate public safety department. It's not just the care teams that go out in the field that covers these 911 operators, et cetera. So I was just trying to take this a step further. Do you see this as a situation now that care is kind of split off, able to do this single dispatch thing? Is the pressure on for Seattle police to show response times improving now that they have more support from care and more dollars in their pocket too? This is a situation where the city is making a big investment. And I think there are a number of people, certainly on the city council, are saying, all right, let's show some data here that shows some results. Help me out with that piece of it.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you think the goal of care
Mm,
is. And the reason I think it has been such a darling both inside and outside City Hall is that you can frame it in whichever way you want, depending on what your politics are. So
like it
the kind
helps
of
police. Okay, I see what
right,
you're saying.
there's
Yeah.
two angles, which is one, it's better to have these people at these calls than it is to have police. And the argument there is they have better connections to resources,
Hmm.
treatment, housing, whatever it might be. Therefore, you're going to be more likely to come up with some kind of long-lasting and sustainable solution. The other argument is they take calls away from police and free the police up to do
Hmm.
any number of more important things. I think
Yep.
those both can be true at the same time. How you measure success, though, I think for perhaps the more left-wing progressive folks in Seattle, the more important thing is that the care officers are allowed to do the sort of work that they're there to do and
Yeah.
kind of come up with solutions for these people. Perhaps the more law enforcement minded wing of Seattle politics is thinking, yes, this is great. It gives us more opportunity to send these cops to specialty units or on
Yep.
faster to higher priority calls. So, I think what constitutes success probably depends on which of those two viewpoints you take on care.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Such an interesting conversation to have. Thanks for breaking that down. All right, another story we're tracking this week. Councilmember Rink and many other transportation advocates are demanding better bus lanes. There's been a situation on Capitol Hill unfolding over this past month where the Department of Transportation was close to removing a bike lane and about 50 feet worth of a bus lane for the Route 2 bus. Some business owners said, hey, this isn't really coming together. Let's give this back to cars. It looked like that bus lane really wasn't operational. And then the transit activist came in, really pushing SDOT to reverse its course here, keep both of these elements, the bike lane and allowing Metro's number 2 bus to actually use the bus lane. So now, of course, advocates are calling for more bus lanes, buoyed by this small victory. And David, they're looking at places like Aurora Avenue North, Aurora Avenue North, Rainier Avenue South, both not great for on-time bus service. Is there enough steam out of this effort on Capitol Hill to bring some bigger changes to local bus service? It just seems like such a massive problem to tackle.
It is a massive problem. And, when you look at the rapid ride lines, for example, those were built with a lot of help from the federal government. And as we know, the federal government is not particularly likely to want to be funding bus lanes in Seattle right now. So I think that makes it more difficult, not to mention, just the challenges of the budget facing
Sure.
Seattle right now.
Right.
I think theoretically, I heard, I think it was a KUOW debate between Katie Wilson and Mayor Harrell. They
Ah,
had a little lightning round at the end, and one of the questions was, does Seattle need more bus lanes? Both of them answered yes.
sure.
Um, so I think politically, it's a thing that if you asked, I would say if you gave that speed round to pretty much everybody in City Hall, they would probably say yes.
Sure.
But the question of the political will and budget to make it happen,
And where do you put them? Yeah.
and where do you put them? I'm a little more skeptical about that.
Yeah, yeah, me too. And it does turn into a little bit of a safety issue too. Your colleague Nick DeShays was writing about this because you've got some bus driver unions out there saying, hey, you got transit that might not be reliable, and then drivers on the front lines kind of have to deal with some of these frustrated passengers too. Does that bus safety issue factor into all this? Where do you see that going?
I think bus safety is important for the drivers, and uh, certainly, and actually, one of the budget amendments from Councilmember
Yeah,
Saka increases some funding for transit safety.
right.
I'm I don't entirely understand the connection between new bus lanes and increased danger.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's like
I would
passengers are less frustrated or something and less likely to cause problems on the bus. I don't know. It's a little bit of a reach. I hear you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you try and take the number 8 bus on Denny in rush hour, that is frustrating as all get up. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how any reality could be more frustrating than that.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you loud and clear. All right. Well, coming up, some massive layoffs planned for the Seattle area in the tech world. Thousands expected to be cut from Amazon's ranks. What impact will that have on the city of Seattle? More details coming up on What's Next. We've got some news coming in this week about some major cuts to Amazon's workforce. A number of news outlets reporting this. Amazon will cut 14,000 corporate staffers, as it looks like this year, a move aimed at readying the company for wide adoption of AI technology, and it might not be done on the layoffs. Reuters was reporting this number could rise to 30,000 people. And David, I don't know yet, I don't think we all know yet about how many of these layoffs might be in Seattle, but I'm thinking about a downtown that's still in the middle of a slow recovery, and this feels like a cause of concern for me. How do you look at this?
Yeah, my first reaction was how would this have changed that economic forecast that we had just a week ago
Mm.
that is kind of dictating how the council, how much money the council thinks it has.
Because you're talking
Because
about employees there that generate the payroll expense tax and et cetera for the city of Seattle, like that.
yeah, I mean that payroll expense tax is an important part of how the budget is being balanced, and then I mean sales tax and just sort of
Sure. Right.
economic activity
Right.
in downtown is really important. So um, you know, I think I read that there are what like 300,000 corporate employees across Amazon. So in
Hmm.
theory, 14,000 is not a huge chunk, but of the whatever 70,000 in Seattle, I think probably most of those would be considered corporate. So
Yeah.
you have to think that a decent chunk is going to come from Seattle and or Bellevue or whatever it might
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Um, more broadly too, these economic forecasts are just kind of, to an extent, a little vibes based, which
Yeah.
is what trends are we seeing? Where do we think this is going? And
Hmm.
I think it's probably less important the specific 14,000 number for that and more that the fact that these big tech companies are starting to actually make real world, real life decisions that affect people based on what they see is coming in AI. And
Yeah.
so even if the 14,000 doesn't hit Seattle particularly hard, it's hard to not see this as a sort of concerning trend for a economy in the Seattle area, which is heavily dependent on tech.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Amazon does some, we saw earlier some layoffs from Microsoft this year. So it's just these are starting to pile on top of each other. And you have to think there are other tech companies out there, bigger or smaller maybe, who take cues from Amazon and say, oh, wait a minute, if they're cutting this, then how does that affect my company? I think, I guess what you're saying is there's a larger ripple effect here potentially from what Amazon is doing that could have impacts on other parts of our tech industry here.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard to say, tech seems like isn't necessarily always a harbinger for the larger
Hmm.
economy. The tech
Okay.
companies kind of grow and shrink a lot at their own whims. And
Hmm.
and I do think some of these layoffs we're seeing is continued, I don't know if you want to call it correction, but
Ah,
to reverting to the mean that we saw more pre-pandemic, because these
yeah.
companies hired just an insane number of people
Yeah.
around the time of the pandemic. And
Yep.
so I think if you look at numbers compared to then, I think they're probably still higher actually. And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
I, I don't know what it means for the broader economy, but Seattle and Bellevue just happen to have the unfortunate situation where their economies are pretty dependent on tech. And
Oh
so
yeah.
even if it doesn't say anything about the greater American or world economy,
Hmm.
it's certainly not good news for the Puget Sound region economy.
Yeah, the local economy is definitely going to be seeing some fallout here. All right, well, it is time to wrap up here. And David, I know we've touched on the Mariners a few different times over the past couple of weeks here. And as bummed as I am that they did not go to the World Series, I gotta say, on the plus side, I'm feeling so much less anxiety when I'm watching
Yes.
baseball. Do you feel the same way? What's been going on, man?
Yeah, I tuned in for about 5 innings of the
Of the
Dodgers
18
Blue
inning
Jays
game?
18
Yeah,
inning game,
yeah.
and I enjoyed it, but my heartbeat never increased, and I was able to turn it off and then go straight to sleep and fall asleep and have a good night's sleep. And so, uh, yeah, I wish they were in the World Series, but certainly my nights are a little more relaxed.
Yeah, and I gotta say, this whole extra inning thing, where during the regular season, of course, they've got that kind of ghost runner on second, and manufacturing runs is a little bit simpler. I don't know if like the players aren't used to it or what, but these extra innings are just so gripping. They're fun to watch, but man, it's agonizing to watch them too.
Yes. Yeah, I saw someone compare it to an extended game of Russian roulette, and that's how it feels to me.
Yikes. I'm glad everybody's okay. And watching Shohei Ohtani play is an absolute joy. Wow, what a superstar not a superstar in the making, a superstar fully established there. David, thank you so much for talking to me about everything you do. Much appreciated, my friend. And thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. If you want to be a patron and support the show, please do it. Pledge $5 per month or more on Patreon to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Would very much appreciate that support. You can always hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you are listening. We are there. Thanks for watching also on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.